our president witnesses back on the stand, and Mr. Doherty, we're receiving your testimony.
Thank you. Did you receive, for examination, what was identified to you as item A6A, which is 2 swabs of a cell phone recovered from grade B, a cell phone case recovered from grade B?
Yes, that sample was in my first set of samples that I examined.
Did you attempt to obtain a DNA profile from the swabs that you were given from the cell phone case?
First, I attempted to see if it had any human DNA on it. That particular sample, there was some sort of inhibition that took place in my attempt to determine how much human DNA was present. So I took it back through a cleanup process to try and get rid of the inhibitor. And then on subsequent testing of it, there was no DNA recovered from it.
Okay. So no DNA on A6A. Did you receive, for examination, what was identified to you as item D1, a fingernail from the autopsy of someone McStay?
Yes, I believe that was in the second set of samples that I looked at.
In March?
Yes, sir.
And did you attempt to obtain a DNA profile from that item?
Yes, sir. First, I took a look at it under a microscope. Usually when you're talking about fingernails, the idea is that perhaps someone had a chance to scratch somebody else and there might be tissue underneath the fingernails. So that was one of the first things I did, was take a look at it to see if I could identify anything that looked like a tissue sample. God bless you. But there wasn't. That wasn't surprising to me. So what I did was I went ahead and swabbed an area of the nail that I thought would have any tissue on it if at some time there were some. And when I say tissue, it's tissue foreign to the person whose nail it was.
Okay. And what were the results of your analysis for D1?
D1, there was no DNA detected in the extract.
Turning to items recovered from grade A, did you receive, well, both grade A and the autopsy of Joseph McStay, Sr., did you receive an item labeled A20 as a fingernail that was recovered from grade A?
Yes, sir.
And what did you do with that, and what were the results?
I did pretty much the same thing. Took a look at it under a stereo microscope. Did not see any particular matter that I identified as tissue. Swabbed the tip of the fingernail and extracted that.
And what were the results?
There was no identifiable DNA recovered from it.
Did you also obtain, for examination, item E6 that was identified as swabs of the fingernails from the autopsy of Joseph McStay, Sr.?
Yes, I did.
And did you perform a similar process with those swabs?
These particular swabs, let me check my notes and make sure that, I thought it was it might have been a fragment actually that I received. Yes, it was a fingernail that was in the skeletal remains. And so treated it the same way in terms of looking at it under a stereo microscope and swabbed the underside tip of the fingernail fragment and extracted it for DNA.
And what were the results?
No DNA was recovered.
Did you receive for examination an item labeled E14, which was identified as a large mass of dirt from the autopsy of Joseph McStay, Sr.?
Yes, I did.
I'm going to show you the first page of Exhibit 862, if I can have that. 22. appears to be 6 photographs on that page. Do you see the photograph?
Yes, I do.
And can you describe what you're seeing here? Start with the first 2 photographs on the top.
First 2 photographs represent the box that the item or items were packaged in. I have a picture of the outside of the box in the upper left-hand corner of this exhibit. The upper right-hand corner, excuse me, it's after I opened the box and looked into it. There's a large mass that is a combination of various items and dirt. You can see a kind of an electric cord that's present there. This was just a bunch of caked dirt around the wire and fabric.
Go down to the next 2 photographs on that page. Can you identify those for us, please? The middle row here.
Yes, this is the lump of fabric and dirt, and I was especially interested in the wire there that had some sort of knot in it.
Can you point that out with the laser pointer on the other?
This area right here was looked like electrical wire, and there's a kind of a knot right there. The rest of this was some sort of fabric, a material that that this was around.
And going down to the last 2 photographs here.
So I flipped that. Basically flipped it over and took a look at the other side.
And turning to the second page of that exhibit, 5 more photographs. The top of that second page, can you tell us what we're seeing there?
Yes, this again is from another angle. It's a knot right here that was of interest to me for purposes I described earlier.
Going down to the second row of pictures, can you tell us what we're seeing there?
Yeah, the item was described as containing a green shirt and cloth and white electrical cord. This was a tag that appeared to be on the green shirt, right here.
And then the picture on the right there in the middle row.
The picture on the right is just a general picture of the material. I believe there's a small fragment of wire that was also present in this mass.
And finally, the last 2 photographs, starting with the bottom left.
Before I swabbed the area of the wire that I was looking to potentially get some sort of trace or touch DNA.
And then the photograph on the bottom right of the second page of that exhibit.
This would be the photograph that I took after I did the swabbing. Some areas of the cord should look a little cleaner.
And did you label those swabs, or that swab from this cord, item E15?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Did you attempt to obtain a DNA profile or DNA analysis on the swab of that area?
I attempted to see if there was DNA present on the swabs that I used, and there was no DNA recovered from these swabs.
So you labeled E14 was the large mass, and that you examined, and then E15 was the swab from the electrical cord contained in that mass. Is that right?
Yes, it's the whole item was described to me as E14 and E15, and I kind of took it to be that E14 dealt with the cloth and material that was there, and E15 was the cord.
So the E14 we can write examined on the on our chart here, and E15 we can write no DNA.
I would say E14, I didn't really examine it. I looked at it and realized that there was nothing worth analyzing on that particular sample. So it's not analyzed.
Okay, not analyzed.
But I did look at it.
Okay. And then the swab E15 contained no DNA.
Correct.
Why did you pick an area of nodding to swab?
It was under the idea that perhaps if there were some sort of touch or trace DNA present, maybe the knot area would have protected it from the degradation that I felt took place through the entire grave site. It, for me, it was not a very viable hope, but it was something to do in response to the request that was made to look for some sort of perhaps trace DNA that was present. Honestly, I had no hope of finding any DNA in any of these samples.
Assume you had. Assume you found an allele or two or something. How much weight would you give that?
Well, there are a lot of various possibilities. One of the first things I would expect, if any DNA had survived, then I would expect to find some DNA from the massive amount of DNA from the bodies that were present, if it survived this process. I don't even think I would find that.
And in fact,
And therefore, if I don't find that, any hope for trace or touch DNA is gone.
now when you say hope for touch or trace DNA, and again, if you were to assume that you were to find something that didn't come from the bodies, do you look at the reliability of the evidence? In other words, the original sample, are you looking at the reliability of that?
If I understand your question right,
Hopefully.
that if I analyze these samples and got DNA results from them, would I feel that they were reliable?
Yes.
No, sir. I doubt that anything that you put in the ground 3.5 or 4 years earlier survived. So whatever DNA results you get would not represent what was put in the ground.
Objection, speculation.
Overruled.
Okay. Did you receive items, what you labeled, or items E8 through E13? And that was identified to you as coming from the autopsy of Joseph McStay.
Yes, sir. Again, it was another large mass of dirt that came. Again, in this particular item or exhibit or piece of evidence, I focused again on those things that had knots in them.
And if I can have the attorney too, Becky, thank you. I'm going to show you the third page of Exhibit 862. That page is a series of 6 photographs. You can describe the top 2 photographs and we'll just go down the line.
Yes, sir. Again, this is kind of the similar layout to the previous series of photos that I took of the sample we just talked about. This is the box, just the outside of the box. This is when you open the box and look down inside. It was a mass of something that had wires and a piece of a red strap. Those are the 2 items that I focused on in this for this particular exhibit.
Now, the middle 2 photographs here, Just different angles of the same item?
Yes, flipping things over. You can see that there is some sort of material that is here. It has stripes running through it. Don't know exactly what that was.
And the bottom two photographs of that third page of that exhibit.
Again, these are other angles looking at that same mass. Again, I'm looking. You can see that there's an electrical plug here. So any knots that would be in that cord would be of interest to me for this particular swabbing exercise.
And to the fourth page of that, top two photographs, in particular the one on the right that show the red strap.
Yes, this would be the red strap that I eventually took out of the mass. You see, it kind of is laying here in the upper right-hand side of this. Took that out. There were some knots and potentially protected areas in there that I examined.
More than one knot, use the plural there, if you recall.
Let me check my notes. Well, my notes indicate a single knot.
And
What I did with that particular knot is because I realized it was kind of a long stretch of red material. I actually marked the edges of the knot with a Sharpie so that I would know once I untied it what area I should use to swab.
okay. And I'm looking at the bottom right photograph of that page of that exhibit.
Yeah. In fact, you can see the red Sharpie marks. I'm sorry, the Sharpie marks on the red strap as well as on the electrical cord.
And from that mass, then, did you get item E11, which is the white electrical cord with the plug? It's represented there on the bottom right.
Yes.
And you swabbed that area?
I swabbed the area. Swabbed the area in between where I made those marks with the Sharpie.
And it looks like it was almost an area that's clean there on the right-hand side of the white cord.
There's a reason it's clean. It's because I swabbed
You
it.
swabbed it, because that's
Yes.
after swab. And what were the results of your analysis of that swab? That is E11.
E11, no DNA was recovered.
And did you take swabs and labeled E12A, which was a swab from the piece of red cord knotted with the electrical cord, and E12B, a knotted portion of the red strap from the autopsy?
Swabbed both of those and recovered no DNA.
Okay. Were you also given item A13, which was identified to you as a strap from the ground found northwest of grave B?
Yes.
And what were the results of your analysis of that?
I swabbed some areas of that particular item and did not recover any DNA from there.
And did you also receive a red strap labeled A25, the red strap from grave A?
Yes, I did.
And what did you do with that?
That particular strap in my opinion, was not suitable for any sort of testing. Didn't really have any protected areas. Therefore, I did not do any sort of swabbing or anything like that with it.
So that was not analyzed?
Correct.
I'm going to show, put on the overhead, the last page of Exhibit 862. Are those two photographs of that item 825?
Should be able to find that in my notes.
Page 15 of 56 in the March report.
Thank you. Yes, as you can, well, what you can see on there, basically the strap's just covered with a layer of dirt and fine particulate matter.
There we go, a little bit brighter.
Yes, I felt it was not suitable for analysis for touch DNA or trace DNA.
And I forgot to show you, if we can back up to the clump of material, items E12, if I can have my computer back, Deputy. 3 more photographs of that, and then we'll move on to the next item. Can you tell us what we're looking at there? This is going to be page...
E12. This is the knotted area of the red tie that I marked with the margins up with a Sharpie. And then on the right side of this exhibit, you can see the Sharpie marks are where I, in between those marks is where I swabbed for the samples.
Okay. And the last photograph is after you packaged it back up?
Wrapped everything back up in a red hazard bag, biohazard bag before I put it back in the box.
Okay. Did you receive 2 items labeled A19A and A19B? A19A was it identified to you as 2 swabs from the sledgehammer?
Yes, that would have been in the first set of samples that I examined, reported in February of 2014.
And A19B is identified to you as a, put in quotes, blood-stained swabs from the sledgehammer.
That's correct.
Okay. Let's start with A19A, the swabs from the sledgehammer. What were the results of your analysis? What did you do? What did you find?
Again, looking at my notes, A19A, I just took the 2 swabs and extracted them for potential DNA, see how much human DNA may be on them. So A19A, there was a very low level of human DNA present on there. It had one very weak allele that could be called, and that was an X at the amylogenin locus. And that was it. So really I could make no, and it was very low level, so therefore I made no conclusions with regard to the DNA recovered from that item.
Well, what do you mean by low level?
If you remember when we talked about analytical thresholds and the height that you can have of different alleles that are present, it was barely over the analytical threshold. So it was barely high enough for us to even call it a true allele that is present. So being, because it was relatively weak, I really didn't have any confidence about whether I would have or would have not detected a Y allele if it were present. Therefore, I made no conclusions even regarding whether it was male or female DNA that I recovered.
If I can have my, oh, yeah, so if we put on there, oh, never mind, let's turn to this. This is Exhibit 858. Can you tell us what we're looking at here?
Earlier when we spoke about the electroparograms and the graphs that we get for the different DNA locations, and I made a mention about excuse me, when you have really low-level DNA, you get to see the baseline a little bit more clearly. When we take a look at the results that are for the D8S1179 locus, you can see that it looks as though there are a couple of tall peaks there. But when you take a look at how high they are, they're about 10, 12, 14, probably about 15 RFUs. Our analytical threshold is 50, about 3 times that height. You can also see other peaks along here that are, we call it grass when it gets this low, just up and down and so on. This is the instrument noise that we spoke of earlier. This is the reason that we set an analytical threshold, saying that if we're really going to call a peak a true allele, it has to reach a certain criteria or a certain height. In this particular sample, only one peak. There were a couple of them that look like they're larger than the rest. But when you take a look at the RFUs, they're not high enough. They're not 50. When you take a look at the next thing down, there is an X allele that is present. It has an RFU value of 63. So it is just barely over the analytical threshold that we have that will allow us to actually call the allele. You'll also notice there are virtually no other peaks there. There still is a lot of grass or background noise. This is basically an uninterpretable result.
So if we were to, can we have an overhead that? If we were to label that, we would say low level of human DNA, no interpretable results. Would that be accurate?
That sounds good.
How about with regard to A19B, which was the swabs, the blood stain from the sledgehammer? What did you do with those?
Well, one of the first things I did was I tested the area of the swabs with a screening test that is what we call a presumptive test for blood. Really what the test does is it tests for the heme group in hemoglobin. The heme structure is called a porphyrin structure. It is more stable than many other biological molecules. So the chances of it surviving are greater than some of the other biochemical markers that we use for screening. So I went ahead and tested this for orthocolony, which is a chemical test for hemoglobin, and actually just the heme group, and the test was negative. So I did not detect blood on these swabs. I then went ahead and extracted the swabs.
And what were the results?
No DNA was recovered.
So it would it be fair to say on A19B it was negative for blood and no DNA recovered?
Very fair to say, yes, sir.
Turning to the items that were taken from the Fallbrook house from 2014, did you receive an item labeled I-1, which was identified to you as swabs from the spot/stain on the commode door in the master bathroom of the Fallbrook house? placard 1.
Yes, sir, that would have been in the third set of samples that I examined.
Okay. And
That was I-1?
I-1, yes.
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay. What did you do with the swab of that spot stain from the house from 2014?
I did a presumptive color test for the presence of blood. That test was positive, so it indicates blood, but it is not a conclusive test that says, yes, human blood is present. I then extracted the swab and recovered human DNA and got a DNA type from it.
And did you compare that DNA type that you obtained from the swab with the who was identified, the profile of who was identified to you as the current owner of the house in 2014, Sandra O'Callahan?
Yes, I did. I compared it to her and also to, there was a Sean O'Callahan, and there were 2 other reference samples that were submitted at the time. I also then would have compared it to any other reference samples that I had received regarding this case, including Mr. Merritt and the McStays.
And go ahead, what was the result?
I'm going to say that the result indicated a single source female, and it matched the DNA profile of Sandra O'Callahan. And the other reference DNA samples and those people were eliminated as being the source of this profile.
So we wrote matches Sandra O'Callahan under item I-1. Does that sound accurate?
Yes, sir, it does.
Did you also receive an item labeled I-4, which was swabs from an area of fluorescence at placard 3 at the Fallbrook residence from 2014?
Yes, I did.
Can you tell us what the results of your analysis of that was? What you did and what the results were?
I tested the swabs with a presumptive color test for blood, and the test was negative, so no blood was detected. There was I extracted the swabs for DNA. I got weak DNA results indicating a mixture of at least 2 individuals. There was a partial profile that I developed looking at the mixture that indicated it was a male contributor. I eliminated pretty much everybody for being the major contributor to that sample. There was also a trace contributor. I made no comments about whether the people were included or excluded with regard to the trace. I really couldn't make any conclusions on that. So I have, in essence, an unknown male contributor with a major profile in that sample.
Did you submit that sample to what's known as CODIS?
Yes, I did. It was entered into CODIS on October 6th, 2014, and to my knowledge, there has not been any hits against the database.
And when you say everybody, that was everybody that you had known samples for.
That's correct.
Yes. There was more than we've named here. We named the O'Callahans, the defendant, McStays. There was more. No,
that's right. There were quite a few.
So, what should we write here for item 4, placard 3, in shorthand?
Shorthand?
Yeah.
Weak DNA mixture, major male profile entered into CODIS, or unknown major male profile entered into CODIS.
Can you repeat that? weak DNA mixture,
weak DNA mixture,
major
unknown major male profile entered into CODIS.
A couple more here from the Fallbrook House in 2014. I-6, did you receive that, and was that identified as a swab of an area of fluorescence at placard 4?
Yes, sir.
And what were your results of your analysis there?
Again, I did a presumptive color test for blood. The test was negative, so I did not detect blood on the swab. I got weak DNA results indicating the presence of 2 individuals. It appeared that there was a major female contributor and a low-level trace contributor. Sandra O'Callahan is included as a possible source of a major DNA contributor there. In terms of the low-level trace, there was very little information. Almost everybody was excluded with the exception of Joseph McStay, Sr., and that is a really, I would call it a tenuous inclusion. And then I really could make no conclusion with regard to McStay child number 1 as to whether they contributed to the mixture or not.
So, major contributor matches Sandra O'Callahan?
Correct.
Possible
Or
trace.
includes Sandra O'Callahan.
Includes Sandra O'Callahan. Possible trace of Joseph McStay Sr.
Very weakly.
Let's talk about that. When you say very weakly, you actually, after you obtain a result, you can perform a statistical analysis, right?
Yes,
Am I
sir.
saying that right?
There is, when results are obtained and a positive comparison is made, it is then possible, there are several ways to statistically approach this to get an idea of how common this potential match or include, in this case, an inclusion would be. And you do this by taking a look at the frequency of these various alleles, and you can figure out how likely it is to just randomly pick somebody in the population and they would also be included. In this instance, if I may give an example, when we talk about that I included Sandra O'Callahan as the major source, the chance that I could randomly pick somebody and they would also be included as the major source was like 1 in 77 quadrillion African Americans, 1 in 23 quadrillion Caucasians, and 1 in 15 quadrillion Hispanics. Pretty rare. Chances are pretty good that's her DNA. But I can't say that specifically because she's included. There's a couple of questions with regard to that. When we talk about the trace, and I work out the numbers for the trace, and the fact that Joseph McStay Sr. is included, the chance of me randomly going to the population, picking somebody else out that would also be included, 1 in 6 Hispanics. So, roughly speaking, 2 or 3 members of the jury here would also be included. So, as I say, it's a very weak inclusion. Something just based on my results and the way that we report these, I had to include in the report, but it's extremely weak.
DNA includes O'Callahan. Weak trace.
So would you say weak trace for Joseph McStay?
I'd say the trace contributor tenuously includes Mr. McStay.
Okay. Did you receive Item I-10, which was identified to you as swabs of the wall by the stairs from the Fallbrook home in 2014.
Yes, I did.
And what were the results of your analysis of that?
Again, I tested it with a presumptive color test for blood. The test was negative, no blood was detected. When I extracted it, I recovered no DNA, no human DNA.
Did you also analyze an item that was identified to you as coming from Mr. Merritt's Chevrolet truck, item J18?
Yes, I did.
And that was identified as 2 swabs from the front right seat back of the Chevrolet truck.
Yes, sir.
And what was the results of that analysis?
Again, the swabs, I tested them with a presumptive color test for blood. The test was negative, blood was not detected. When I extracted, indicating a mixture of at least 2 people, appeared to have a major female contributor, a low-level minor contributor, with regard to, I pretty much eliminated everybody as being potential contributors. By everybody, I mean all of the reference samples that I looked at. As being contributors to this mixture, with the exception of McStay child number 1, in which I made no conclusion. I believe McStay child number 1, I had less reference profile for. And so I just really couldn't make a statement one way or the other.
So if you wrote that it was negative for blood, and that it was a weak mixture,
And I could not include anybody in the mixture from the reference samples that I have.
okay. With regard to the Isuzu Trooper, did you receive items, did you receive item F38, which was identified to you as 2 swabs from the driver's interior door handle, power window, and door lock controls?
Yes, sir, I did. All of the swabs from the Isuzu Trooper were in the first set of samples that I examined.
And can you tell us what the results of your analysis of that area was? The driver's side, interior door handle, power window, and door lock controls.
There was a low level of DNA recovered. There was a mixture of at least 3 individuals. And what I did was I based on the results that I got, and the fact that it was taken from the McStay family car, I felt it was safe in some instances to make an assumption that some of the DNA alleles that I detected actually came from members of the McStay family. So you'll find that as true for all samples that I examined from the trooper. I felt that Joseph McStay was present as a major contributor, and that Summer McStay was present as a trace, a very low-level contributor, and that there was another trace, low-level contributor, but there was not enough information for me to make any sort of conclusionary statements on that.
Okay. Were you able to conclude whether it was a male or a female on the trace contributor?
No.
Did you receive item F39, which was identified as 2 swabs from the front passenger interior door handle, power window, and door lock controls?
Yes, I did.
Okay. What were the results of your analysis of that?
I recovered human DNA. When I did the typing of the human DNA, I got a mixture of at least 3 individuals, and it was kind of a complex mixture, and excuse me, and I decided not to make any sort of conclusions regarding the contributors to this mixture.
Why?
Bottom line, I felt it was too complex to interpret. There were just too many variables that were going on with regard to the only interpretation I could make is that there was at least one male contributor. There were X and there was a Y. But that was it.
So on F38, we can say a mixture of at least 3 individuals.
F39.
I'm sorry, I'm going back to 38.
Okay.
38, there's a mixture of at least 3 individuals with Joseph included as the major contributor.
Because the approach on the Isuzu, the thought process is different than some of the others. In this instance, there's an assumption made that Joseph is present. Because really what I'm looking for when I look at the Isuzu trooper, I'm looking for alleles that don't belong to any of the McStay family. That's it. I kind of have an expectation that all the contributors, all the family members probably contributed to mixtures of DNA in there. So really what I'm looking for are alleles that are foreign to them, that I feel confident that I can make an interpretation of. So when I talk about F38, part of my interpretation is I see results that indicate that Joseph McStay Sr. potentially is present, so I'm going to assume he's there as the major contributor. I feel pretty confident in that. I see some other results that indicate that Summer McStay may be present there as a trace, so I'm going to go ahead and make that assumption and see what I have left over. What I have left over doesn't really give me enough information to compare to 2 reference samples. So I stop there.
Okay.
So when you say that I included somebody, well, it's actually part of the assumption. I actually went into these samples feeling these guys are probably present.
Okay. So if we wrote assumed Joseph McStay is the major contributor, Summer, trace, not enough information for 3rd.
Correct.
And then F39, again, is a mixture of 3 individuals, one of whom was male, but it's too complex to draw any other conclusions.
I could not get a good handle as to what combination of whoever was potentially there. I didn't feel comfortable making any sort of assumptions. In essence, I punted. I did not feel comfortable making any conclusions on this mixture.
Did you receive item F40, which is 2 swabs of the left rear passenger interior door handle and power window control?
Yes, I did.
And can you tell us what the results of that was?
I was able to extract human DNA from there. I felt that there was a mixture of at least 2 individuals. I felt that the results are consistent with a mixture of Joseph McStay Sr. and McStay child number 2. And I also felt that I could eliminate Summer McStay, McStay child number 1, Tracy Ann Russell, Blanche Arande, and Charles Merritt as being contributors to this mixture.
Mixtures of at least 2 individuals, consistent with a mixture of Joseph McStay Sr. and McStay child number 2.
Yes, sir.
Did you receive item F41, which was identified to you as 2 swabs of the right rear passenger interior door handle and power window control?
Yes, sir, I did.
What were the results of your analysis of that?
A low level of human DNA was recovered. When I went through the DNA typing, it appeared as though there was a a mixture of at least 4 individuals, at least one of which was a male, and because of the low-level results and the fact that it was a 4-person mixture, I did not feel comfortable interpreting the results. Again, this is another one that I punted.
Too complex?
Correct. That's actually, that's probably the more scientific term. It's too complex for me to interpret.
I'm going to do the next two in conjunction with each other. Item F42, which is the swab of the mouth of the metal coffee cup taken from the trooper. And item F43, which is the swab of the neck of a water bottle taken from the Isuzu trooper. Can you tell us what your results were on those two items?
For both of these samples, there was a single source male DNA profile that was obtained, and that profile matched Joseph McStay Sr.
Did you receive item F37, which was identified to you as 2 swabs, results of that analysis?
Human DNA was recovered. There was a mixture of DNA from at least 3 individuals, and assuming that there were 3 individuals present, and that Joseph McStay Sr. was present as a major contributor, and that Summer McStay was present as a trace contributor, felt that the remaining alleles included Charles Merritt as a possible trace contributor.
Possible trace or possible minor contributor?
Oh, I'm sorry, you said 38? Or 37?
I'm on 37.
37, as a possible trace contributor is how I reported it.
Okay. And with regard to the statistical analysis you performed, what were the numbers?
In this instance, an individual, if you went out and randomly picked an individual from the population to see if they would also be included in this particular sample, it was 1 in 4,500 of African Americans, 1 in 3,300 Caucasians, and 1 in 12,000 Hispanics.
Oh, okay, so back on, so just to clarify, Joseph McStay was the major contributor and you had 2 trace contributors?
Correct.
Okay.
One of the trace contributors I assigned to Summer McStay, and the remaining alleles from the other trace contributor, I felt Charles Merritt was included as a possible source of that.
And finally, did you receive item F36, which was identified as 2 swabs from the steering wheel of the Isuzu trooper?
Yes, sir, I did.
And what was the result of your analysis of those swabs?
Human DNA was recovered from those swabs. The results indicated a mixture of at least 3 individuals. And if I assume the presence of 3 individuals with Joseph McStay Sr. as the major contributor and Summer McStay as a trace contributor, I felt that there was a minor contributor and that Charles Merritt was included as a potential for this minor contributor.
Okay, when you say it was included as a potential, can you explain that further, please?
Well, again, when I include somebody, it means that they're a possible source of that DNA. I then go on to do, again, another population frequency estimate about how common it would be to randomly pick somebody who would also be included as in this case, a minor contributor.
What was the result of that analysis?
The probability was 1 in 4.3 billion African Americans, 1 in 850 million Caucasians, and 1 in 10 billion Hispanics. And these were based on pretty much the partial DNA profile that I had for this minor thing to do.
Can you tell, based on a DNA analysis, how long that DNA had been present on the skin?
No.
Why not? Can DNA do that? Is there a time marker?
DNA itself cannot. What you need is you need further information from perhaps when the last time a particular item was washed or wiped or cleaned. Then you may be able to make some sort of statement with regard to the time. But looking at the DNA itself, no.
Can you tell, in DNA analysis, can you tell if it's a secondary transfer? You know what I mean by secondary transfer?
Yes, I do. Secondary transfer means that, for instance, if I shook hands with you and then I touch this countertop, secondary transfer would be your DNA now on this countertop. Basically, I was used as a vector to get it there. In general, the presence of DNA does not really talk about the mode in which it got there. It just talks about the presence of it. And then with regard to the mode or the mechanism for how that happens, that is generally up for debate.
Well, does it depend on a lot of factors?
And that's why it winds up being for debate. It depends on a lot of factors, and I think it can't be proven one way or the other. But it depends on a lot of factors.
And one of the factors would be how much a person sheds, sneezing, coughing, that kind of thing.
Yes, sir. The term shedder DNA, I don't particularly care for that. I understand what it means. Basically, it means that a person has a higher propensity for having DNA on their skin surface when they touch things. How that DNA gets there is maybe have some questions whether they secrete it somehow or sneeze on their hands or just have a particular hygiene mechanism that allows them to have more DNA on their hands or on other surfaces. That is a variable. The time of contact sometimes may be the mechanism for the contact, whether things have been wiped in the interim. There are all sorts of variables with regard to that.
Okay, now when you say things are wiped, and you mentioned this a little bit earlier, wiped or cleaned off, will just wiping it with a cloth or something like that, will that affect DNA analysis? Will it affect the DNA?
It will not affect the analysis. The analysis is always going to work. The question is whether we're going to recover it and what it is we're going to recover. In the long run, what happens is that things like that interpret how the DNA got there, which is totally separate from the analysis.
How the DNA got there and what happened to it after it got there.
Yeah.
You mentioned CODIS earlier. What is CODIS?
CODIS is a shortened term for the Combined DNA Index System. It is a national network which includes several databases, some of which include DNA profiles that come from evidence that are placed into this particular database to see if there are other evidential items in other states, perhaps in other municipalities that would have matched that particular profile. There's also an offenders database, and in California that includes also an arrestee database. which then can also be compared against the evidential. And sometimes you solve crimes that way. You have an unknown perpetrator for a particular crime. They may be identified, or at least an investigative lead may be determined by comparing it against a convicted offender or arrestee file. There are also missing person files where someone has gone missing, and they can take maybe hair from a hairbrush or DNA from a toothbrush, put that on file, and potentially identify bodies that have been found. In fact, it may have been the missing persons unit that extracted these bones. It to be part of that. But CODIS is basically it's overseen by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and it has several levels. You can have CODIS profiles or profiles that are kept at the local level because of the limited amount of information that maybe you get in some of your evidential profiles. You just compare it to local cases. Other ones qualify for what's called the state, so they can go up to the state level and compare against state offenders. They can compare against other cases that have been worked in the state. And then there's the national level. And at the national level, a case worked in California can be compared against a case worked in Florida. And in fact, there have been times where we have assistant investigators with regard to investigative leads where we've had a match through the computer database that allows an investigator to now pursue his particular case investigation in another state, either looking at another crime that was committed there, or perhaps an offender who has been incarcerated or was caught there. So it's
information into CODIS.
Yes, there are, and a lot of those are contained in the FBI quality assurance for DNA laboratories, quality assurance guidelines. I spoke about those earlier, and it's because of these guidelines that we now can have confidence not just in our own DNA results, but in another lab, if in fact we have a case that matches one of theirs. We can have confidence in the quality of the work that they did because they're following the same set of guidelines. They're using the same set of standards. They are using the same types of DNA locations, and we can there exchange and compare information.
And the standards, you feel confident that they're using the same standards. That's with regard to extraction, amplification, and analysis of the data. Is that right?
Yes, as well as the types of tests that you run, the quality controls that you run on the tests. It also works down to the types of training that you get, the types of continuing education that you do, the types of proficiency testing that you do. DNA analysts are tested twice a year. Given us samples a year, test this, tell me what you get as a result. So we test it, we report back to them, and they tell us whether we got it right or not. All other forensic science fields do it once a year. DNA does it twice a year. And part of it is because of these requirements for the FBI quality assurance, and it is warranted. It is warranted. You maintain your expertise, maintain your ability to produce proper, reliable results.
The results of the analysis that you got that had Charles Merritt as a possible minor male contributor, were those also entered in the codes?
Check, I believe I did.
Page 6 of your February 18th report.
That was on F-36 minor. Actually, I have a listing where I put it into the CODIS system. As far as as I know, there have not been any hits on this particular profile.
We talked about this a little bit. I do want to talk a little bit more. When we're talking about the analytical threshold, when you're looking at the EPGs, and we looked at that grass area, how are those developed? In other words, your lab standard is 50, right? 50 RFUs?
That's correct.
Okay. And where does that come from? Where does that number come from?
It comes from the validation studies that are done prior to putting a particular testing kit into service in the laboratory. You run through a bunch of blank samples, a bunch of reference samples, a bunch of previously extracted case samples. You have a set of mixtures that you purposely mix in different ratios, and you test those to get an idea of how well this particular kit responds to these challenges. In the meantime, you get information on how high is the noise level with regard to the instrument that you're going to be using, with regard to and the kit that you're using. You also get information on how well the kit evenly amplifies the two alleles that are present for a particular locus. If it's a locus that has two alleles. I think your original question dealt with the analytical threshold.
Yes.
This, pretty much, we're looking at the analytical threshold. You concentrate mostly on the negative samples, the samples that basically all you've got is grass. And you take a look at the heights of those different peaks, if you will, the noise that's there. Figure out an average, you figure out a standard deviation, and you add 3 standard deviations to that average. When you do that, in fact, when we did that for identifier, the number actually came out to be about 30. But what was recommended and what had been previously been used with, was recommended by the company was a threshold of 50, which wasn't that much higher, so we adopted 50. The truth is, some of those alleles might be detectable at 30. We just felt comfortable in being able to positively say, yes, if it's above 50, we know it's a bona fide allele.
Talked a lot about your method of collection, and primarily it sounds like, well, solely used swabbing in this case.
I use what's called the double swab technique. Sometimes people call it the wet-dry swab. Because you take one swab and you moisten it. You don't get it too wet, but you moisten it. You swab an area, and then you go back with the dry swab to hopefully pick up any moisture that was left behind. So both those swabs then become the sample. And that's the technique that I use for those.
Why?
Because in a lot of ways you get better information than if you cut out a piece of the sample. If I cut out a piece, let's say, where we actually started was wearing, people who wear hats. We would get a hat submitted to us. It was dropped at the scene of a robbery. They want to know who it was. I used to cut out a small portion of the sweatband there. I did a study on it in our laboratory, and you can get really nice DNA out of it. But what I also learned is that if you cut that sweatband out and you extract it, it's amazing how much dirt is in those headbands. And you wind up with not only your DNA extract, but there's a layer of sediment to the bottom of the tube. This can actually be bypassed if you simply take a swab and swab the surface of the headband. Now you don't get the dirt that's embedded in the headband. You get the DNA that's on the surface of the headband. And so it was a cleaner extract, a way to get away from the potential of some inhibitors that might be present in the dirt and other debris that was in some of these samples. It was just a much cleaner extract. So I went to swabbing these types of areas.
You're familiar with the process known as the MVAC, or microscopic vacuum?
Yes, I am. I have actually practiced it a bit. We have not put it into use in our laboratory yet.
And when you say we, do you still volunteer at the laboratory?
Yes, I do. Even though we talked about retirement, even though I retired 4 some odd years ago, I still go back almost twice a week to the crime lab, and I put in volunteer hours. There are a number of reasons that I do this, not the least of which is I want to try and stay in touch with the field, because as you see, I get called back to answer questions about the field, and I want to kind of keep abreast of how the field is going. Also, there were numerous projects that we always had in the laboratory that we wanted to work on. We never had the time because we were analyzing evidence. I can't analyze evidence anymore since I'm like a civilian volunteer, but I can do those projects. And what I tell people is I used to have to work in the lab. Now I get to play scientist in the lab. It is great. I can go back and still do what kind of in my DNA to do, and that's be a forensic scientist.
Thank you very much, sir. Nothing further.
All right, we'll go ahead and take our afternoon recess system about 10-15 minutes. Keep in mind the admonition previously given to you, not to form or express any opinions about the case, not to discuss the case, and we'll see everyone back about 10-15